When I was a kid, Christmas was always held at our place. My immediate family hosted it every year, and back then, we lived on the upper floor of a two-family house, one my parents owned. The lower unit was a rental, and over the years, a handful of different tenants had lived there. Christmas of 2012 was different. A new tenant had just moved in downstairs. He was a man in his 30s, quiet, reserved, the kind of tenant my parents preferred. No loud parties, no complaints, no drama, just peace and silence. At least, that's what they thought they were getting. But within days of him moving in, strange things started happening. Late at night, we'd hear the front door opening and slamming shut. Not once or twice, over and over again at all hours. The sound would echo up the stairwell, sharp and jarring against the stillness of the night. Sometimes it was accompanied by voices, low, muffled talking that occasionally escalated into raised voices, yelling even. It wasn't just once or twice either, it became a pattern. One night, after another series of bangs and shouting from below, my dad had had enough. He headed downstairs, footsteps heavy with irritation, to find out what was going on and to ask the guy to quiet down. That conversation, whatever was said at that door, marked the beginning of something we didn't expect. It was the moment my dad started to feel that something wasn't right about the man living downstairs. Fast forward to Christmas Eve. The house was alive with warmth and noise, packed with family. Every seat around the long dining room table was taken, all 20 of them filled with relatives chatting, laughing, and passing around second helpings. The air smelled of roasted meat, buttery mashed potatoes, and pine from the freshly decorated tree in the living room. For a while, everything felt normal, safe. My Uncle Jake, who's always been a heavy smoker, had stepped outside for a cigarette more than a few times that night. It was kind of his routine: eat, smoke, smoke. After we finished the main course, he slipped out again, pushing his chair back with a grunt and heading for the door. This time though, he'd left his flip phone on the table. When it rang a few minutes later, once, then again, then a third time, my dad looked over at me. "Go bring that to him, will you?" he said, pointing toward the phone. I grabbed the old flip phone and jogged down the stairs, the cold creeping in from the outside already noticeable in the lower hallway. Now, let me explain how our house was laid out. When you walk in, there's a small entryway with 3 doors. One led to the tenant's apartment downstairs, one was the front door, and then there was a hallway that stretched straight back to the rear door of the house. As I moved to open the front door, something caught my eye. The back door was wide open. It was strange. The air drifting in from outside was icy and sharp, and it carried that dry winter stillness. No one had mentioned going out back, and we rarely used that door during the winter. For a second, I paused, confused. Maybe Uncle Jake had gone out back instead of the front? The phone was still ringing in my hand, buzzing faintly in the quiet hallway. I figured I'd better hurry. I turned and made my way toward the backyard, stepping out cautiously into the cold. The yard was silent. Snow crunched under my feet as I looked around. No Uncle Jake, no glowing ember of a cigarette in the dark. Just the bare trees swaying gently and the faint creak of something shifting in the wind. I was about to turn back when a soft noise made me stop. It came from the shed. The door was open, creaking ever so slightly on its hinges, and someone was inside. I called out, my voice cutting through the cold air. "Uncle Jake?" For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, someone stepped out of the shed. It was too dark to see his face clearly. The backyard light didn't quite reach that far, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. But the figure moved like him. Same build, same slow gait. I figured he must have heard the phone ringing and was trying to get to it in time. But then, something changed. He started walking toward me, quickly. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just in a rush, trying to get to his call. But as he stepped into the range of light spilling from the kitchen window, I saw his face. It wasn't Uncle Jake. It was the tenant from downstairs. His eyes locked onto mine, his expression unreadable, but there was something wrong about the way he looked at me, something unsettling. No smile, no greeting, just a fixed stare and brisk, urgent steps. My stomach dropped. I didn't wait to ask questions. I turned and bolted toward the house, heart pounding in my ears. I barely made it to the back door in time, yanked it shut and slammed it behind me. The impact echoed down the narrow hallway. I didn't stop. I cut through the front of the house and ran out to the front yard, where, thankfully, I found Uncle Jake leaning casually against the porch rail, cigarette glowing between his fingers. I rushed to his side, trying to catch my breath. "The downstairs guy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He was out back, in the shed. He came at me, fast." Uncle Jake gave a short, skeptical laugh. "You sure it wasn't just a misunderstanding?" That was his way. He wasn't the type to panic, and definitely not the kind to start confrontations. Still, I didn't want to be alone, not after what just happened. So I stayed there with him, watching the dark backyard from a distance while he smoked in silence. When he finally flicked the cigarette into the snow, we walked back up to the dining room together. The warmth of the house hit me like a wall, but it didn't shake the chill still crawling through me. I took my seat at the dinner table again, trying to act normal. But when there was a pause in the conversation, I leaned toward my dad and told him everything. The man in the shed, how he followed me, how he didn't say a word. The room fell quiet. My dad's face shifted, the concerned crease between his brows deepening. He didn't say much, didn't want to make a scene, I guess, not in front of the whole family. So he waited. Only after dinner was finished and the plates were cleared did he finally head outside. I watched from the window, my breath fogging the glass. When he came back up, his expression was more serious. He wouldn't answer the door, my dad said, voice low, but the shed was shut. A couple of hours later, after the laughter and clinking dishes had faded, the last of our relatives bundled up and left. The house felt strangely quiet without the crowd. My immediate family, just my parents, my sister, and me, started settling down for the night. I decided to stay up a little longer. There was something comforting about the soft glow of the fireplace mixed with the colored twinkle of the Christmas tree lights. Together, they painted the living room in a gentle, flickering warmth. I stretched out on the couch, letting the crackling of the fire and the quiet hum of a Christmas movie lull me into a peaceful daze. At some point, I must have dozed off. I wasn't fully asleep. More like that hazy, half-conscious state where dreams and reality blur. And then, without warning, I snapped awake. It was quiet, but something felt off. There was a faint creaking, soft, slow, coming from the staircase. I didn't move. I stayed on the couch, eyes half open, mind sluggish. The creak had that unmistakable wooden groan of someone shifting their weight while climbing the steps. Still, I didn't panic. I told myself it was probably just my mom, or dad, or maybe my sister going to the bathroom. Nothing strange, nothing to worry about. From where I was lying, I couldn't see the staircase at all. The massive Christmas tree completely blocked my view. It stood tall and thick in the corner, branches casting gentle shadows across the room as the lights blinked in and out of rhythm. Upstairs, the floors were all carpeted, so once whoever it was reached the top, their footsteps faded into silence. I heard a door open down the hallway, a soft creak, then nothing. Probably my sister. Still, something about the whole moment clung to me like a chill I couldn't shake. The fire was nearly out now, just a few glowing embers buried under ash. The movie I'd been watching had long since ended. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the TV and the occasional pop from the firewood. I glanced at the digital clock beneath the screen. The red numbers blinked 1 a.m. I thought about getting up and going to bed, but honestly, I was too comfortable. Wrapped in a blanket, with the warmth of the dying fire and the cozy flicker of the tree, I just didn't want to move. So, I didn't. I stayed on the couch. Even though something in my gut whispered that I wasn't the only one awake. A few minutes passed in that uneasy stillness. I was lying there, half awake, half asleep, nestled in the dim warmth of the room when I heard it. A faint rustling near the Christmas tree. It was subtle at first, just the soft jingle of something shifting. Then came a small tap, like an ornament had fallen. But it wasn't the kind of sound that happens on its own. It was deliberate, like someone had brushed up against the branches. Someone had definitely walked into it. My body tensed. Slowly, I rolled onto my side to face the tree, heart pounding against my ribcage. The lights blinked lazily on and off, casting colorful patterns on the floor. But the tree itself, it wasn't moving. Not a sway, not a shimmer. I stared for a second longer, then turned back onto my other side, only to freeze. My eyes were still open, and right there, looming above me, was a man. He was standing over me, bent slightly at the waist, his face just inches from mine. My entire body locked up. At first, I wanted to believe it was my dad, maybe checking on me, maybe coming to wake me for something. But as my brain caught up, my breath hitched. The face? It wasn't my father's. It was the tenant, the man from downstairs, and he was just standing there, watching me sleep. My first instinct was pure panic. I screamed, loud, the kind of scream that tears through your throat without warning. In the blur of motion that followed, I saw him lurch forward, reaching for my face, trying to muffle me. A hand came toward my mouth, but by then it was too late. My scream had already shattered the silence. Doors opened, footsteps thundered from down the hall. My dad burst out of his room, face wild with confusion and rage. The man bolted. I sat up, breath ragged, just in time to see him sprinting toward the stairs. My dad chased him, barefoot, no hesitation. But by the time he reached the front door, the man was already in his car, tearing down the street. Later, when we tried to piece everything together, we figured he must have been standing over me, watching, trying to confirm I was asleep. Maybe planning to rob the place, maybe something worse. Luckily for us, my parents had kept detailed information from when he signed the lease. Copies of his ID, references, contact info, everything. They used that to track him down, filed a case for breaking and entering, and we won, easily. But none of that erased what happened. It didn't make the image of his face hovering over mine any less vivid. It didn't erase the feeling of helplessness, or the realization that someone had been in our home, watching, waiting. It was one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced, and it still creeps into my thoughts, especially around Christmas. Christmas Eve, 2015. I had just started a new job as a psychiatric nurse, not exactly the kind of work you ease into. The kicker? My schedule began with overnight shifts, and that included working through Christmas Eve night. Technically, it was already Friday by the time I clocked in, sometime after midnight, but the holiday spirit still lingered faintly in the air. Most of my overnight shifts were uneventful, slow, quiet, long stretches of sitting at the nurse's station, eyes on a computer screen, occasionally scribbling notes or logging observations while the rest of the building slept. Most of the patients, at least, were down for the night by the time I arrived. Every so often, I'd need to check in on a room or walk the halls, especially if someone got restless. It wasn't uncommon for a few of the patients to wake up confused or anxious. Some of them struggled with severe mental disorders, and nights could be unpredictable. Being surrounded by so many individuals with various psychological conditions all under one roof was overwhelming at first. You learn to adapt, but it takes time. There's a certain weight that comes with it, something that hangs in the air like a presence you can't quite name. Still, the Christmas decorations helped. The staff had gone out of their way to brighten up the place. Tinsel wrapped around door frames, paper snowflakes taped to the windows, little wreaths on every patient's door. Even a fake tree stood in the main lobby, its multicolored lights blinking quietly in the dark. At night, the main hallway lights would shut off automatically, replaced by a softer set of dim ceiling fixtures. These, combined with the soft, blinking Christmas lights, created a calm, almost dreamlike atmosphere. It felt peaceful, cozy even. But it also made the silence more noticeable, and the shadows just a little longer than they should have been. There was one patient in particular who had been seriously creeping me out since my first shift. Her name was Bethy. She was elderly, frail, with hollow cheeks, papery skin, and stringy white hair that always looked slightly damp, like she'd just come in from the rain. Her eyes were sharp, too sharp, like they were constantly darting between things only she could see. Bethy had severe schizophrenia. Most nights, she muttered incoherent strings of words to herself, whispers filled with strange cadence and rhythm, as though she were reciting something from memory. Other times, she'd speak louder, almost like she was addressing me directly, but when I'd look at her, she'd be staring off at the corner of the room, eyes glassy. It was just past 3 a.m. when I made my rounds and saw that Bethy was still awake. She hadn't slept a wink, just lying there, eyes open, mumbling to herself in that low, scratchy voice that made the skin on the back of my neck tighten. I stepped into the room. "Bethy, do you need anything?" I asked softly. She slowly turned her head toward me, and that's when I saw it. A smile, but not a gentle or tired one. It was wide, distorted. Her lips peeled back unnaturally, teeth yellow and uneven. Her expression frozen somewhere between delight and madness. Then she laughed. Not loud, not manic, just a soft, airy chuckle that sounded completely detached from reality. It sent a chill down my spine. I suddenly felt like I wasn't in a hospital room anymore, but inside some surreal nightmare, watching a scene I wasn't supposed to witness. She looked away, still smiling, and began muttering again. I couldn't make out most of what she said, just disjointed phrases, pieces of language that meant nothing to me. But one part caught my attention. "Check the bathroom." I froze. The words didn't sound like part of her usual rambling. They were clear, specific, and somehow she said them with a strange urgency. "Bethy," I said, "what did you say?" No response. She turned to her side slowly, pulling the blanket up to her shoulder and resting her head against the pillow as if she were finally ready to sleep. I asked again, "Do you want me to check the bathroom?" Nothing, no movement, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. My stomach tightened. Still, part of my job was to follow through, even when it seemed pointless. So I turned toward the small bathroom across from her bed, just a simple, tiled space with a toilet, sink, and mirror. I stepped inside, flipped on the light. And, just like I expected, everything looked perfectly normal. But something about that moment, about her voice, her smile, the way she suddenly went quiet, stayed with me, long after I turned off the light and stepped back out. I left Beatty's room feeling off. Her words echoed in my head. "Check the bathroom." I walked quietly back to my desk in the hallway, trying to brush it off. Just another bizarre moment in a place full of them. Still, I couldn't stop glancing toward the main bathroom just across from where I sat. The door was closed. It hadn't been earlier. I stared at it for a while. My heart told me to leave it alone, but curiosity, that subtle itch of unease, started to crawl up my spine. I got up, slowly. I crossed the hall and tried the light switch. Nothing. The bathroom lights wouldn't turn on. A soft hum buzzed in the ceiling, like the fixture was trying to come to life, but couldn't. The room beyond the doorway was soaked in shadow. I stood there, just outside the threshold, listening. And that's when I heard it. Breathing. Low. Steady. Like someone was trying to stay quiet. Then, click. A tiny sound from one of the stalls. A latch being touched, or maybe something brushing against the lock. Goosebumps prickled across my arms. I backed away, returned to the desk, and grabbed the small rubber doorstop we kept nearby. I wedged it under the bathroom door and opened it just enough so that the faint light from the hallway could spill inside. It wasn't much, but it was something. I crouched low and peered under the stall doors from a distance. No feet. Both stalls appeared empty, except one of them, the one farthest from the door, had its door shut. Tightly shut. I hesitated. Then I stood, slowly walked toward it, and leaned close enough to look through the narrow crack between the door and the frame. Inside, it was nearly pitch black, but as my eyes adjusted, I thought I saw something, a shape at the very back of the stall, unmoving. My breath hitched. I dropped to my knees again and looked underneath, but now, whatever I thought I saw was gone. The stall was empty. I stood again, pressing my face closer to the crack, eyes straining to see. And there it was, a face, right on the other side. Not just there, but staring back at me, positioned exactly where mine was, peeking, watching. I gasped, stumbled backwards so hard I nearly fell to the floor. My pulse was roaring in my ears, my vision shaking. I scrambled to my feet, turned and sprinted to the door, slamming it shut behind me. My hands fumbled for the desk drawer where we kept the master keys. I grabbed one, turned it in the lock, and sealed the bathroom door shut. Chest heaving, I called over another nurse on duty. My voice must have told her something was seriously wrong because she followed me without hesitation. "I think someone's in there," I told her. "I swear to God, there was someone in there." Together, we unlocked the door. The light switch now worked. Bright fluorescent light poured into the bathroom, chasing away every shadow. We checked both stalls. They were wide open, empty. No sign of anyone, no place to hide. And more disturbing than anything else, there was no way anyone could have left that room. The door had been locked from the outside. Later that night, as the end of my shift crept closer, I found myself drawn back to Bethy. Something inside me, maybe instinct, maybe fear, needed to hear her say something, anything. I wanted answers, even if they came in broken sentences or murmured nonsense. I stepped into her room quietly. She was lying in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like she hadn't moved in hours. Her hands were folded neatly on top of the blanket, her breathing calm. "Bethy," I said softly, trying not to sound too shaken. What was in the bathroom?" No response. I waited a moment longer, hoping for even a flicker of acknowledgement, but she remained still, silent. Eventually, I sighed and gave up. I turned and walked toward the door, slipping on my jacket as I prepared to head home and try to leave whatever the hell that night was behind me. But just as my hand touched the doorknob, her voice floated out behind me. "Merry Christmas." I stopped cold. Turning back slowly, I saw her sitting up slightly, gazing at me with a faint smile. But it wasn't the kind of smile that warmed your heart. There was no warmth in it at all. It felt wrong, too wide, too still. The corners of her mouth curled upward, but her eyes didn't match. They stared through me, unblinking. There was something in that expression that made my chest tighten. I couldn't stay. I gave her a stiff nod, muttered a quiet "good night," and stepped out, shutting the door behind me with trembling hands. I had to work with Bethy for a few more weeks before she was transferred to another facility for hospice care. She never mentioned that night again. Neither did I. But even now, all these years later, I can't shake the feeling. The way she smiled, the way she said those words. I don't know what I saw in that bathroom. I don't even try to rationalize it anymore. But deep down, I still believe there was a connection between Bethy and whatever that was behind the stall door. It's just one of those stories, one of those memories that burrows into your mind and stays there. And no matter how much time passes, it still haunts me. Last year, I wanted to do something special for Christmas, something a little different. My girlfriend and I had just moved into our new apartment together, our very first place. We're still living in it now, but at the time, everything was fresh and exciting. It was going to be our first Christmas there, and I wanted to start a tradition of our own. Neither of us had ever cut down our own Christmas tree before. So I suggested we do exactly that. Go out, just the two of us, and cut down a tree ourselves. We live in New Hampshire, which made it easy enough. Spruce trees grow all over the state, and I figured we could find a nice, quiet forest, pick one we liked, and bring it home. Romantic, memorable, a little adventure before the holiday. Tristan, my girlfriend, wasn't totally sold on the idea at first, but she agreed. We took a short road trip out to a patch of woods I'd read about, a place known for wild spruce. It was a snowy evening, intentionally so. I'd waited for just the right night, thinking the falling snow would make the whole thing feel more magical. The flakes were coming down steadily as I drove, blanketing everything in soft white. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of cold that bites your nose, but makes everything feel still and clean. Eventually, I spotted what looked like a small opening off the side of the road. Hard to see clearly under the snow, but I could make out the subtle dip in the landscape and the edges of tire tracks. I turned the wheel and slowly pulled my pickup into it, tires crunching on gravel hidden beneath the snow. It wasn't paved or marked, but it looked like the perfect spot to leave the truck while we searched for our tree. Secluded, quiet. We were deep in a hilly part of the state, which meant the walk ahead wasn't going to be easy. Sure enough, we ended up doing a lot of uphill trekking through the snow, boots sinking into soft drifts, breath coming out in little clouds. I was excited. It felt like something out of a Christmas card. Tristan, not so much. She complained a lot about the cold, the snow in her boots, how far we had to walk. Her voice echoed off the trees, cutting into the stillness I'd been enjoying. She didn't seem to find this little field trip quite as magical as I did. But I kept telling myself it would be worth it. We just had to find the perfect tree. We kept trudging uphill, snow crunching beneath our boots, breath clouding in the cold air. The forest stretched endlessly around us, tall, towering spruce trees rising up like silent giants, their branches heavy with fresh snow. We were on the hunt for the perfect tree, something small enough to fit in our living room but full and healthy. The search wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. Most of the trees we found were too tall, too wide, or just growing at odd angles. I could hear Tristan sighing behind me every few minutes, clearly growing more impatient. But then, finally, we saw it. A beautiful little spruce, no taller than 6 feet, standing alone in a small clearing. It was perfect, just the right size and shape, like something off a holiday card. I gave the tree a firm pat, snow dusting off the needles and landing softly on my jacket. Then I raised the axe I'd been carrying and got to work. The trunk was fairly slim, so it didn't take too long. After a series of solid, echoing strikes, the tree creaked once, then fell with a soft whump into the snow after I gave it one final kick. We had our tree. But dragging it all the way back down the hill through snow wasn't my idea of a good time. "Can you grab the top end?" I asked, already bending to lift the trunk. Tristan just stood there, arms crossed, visibly annoyed. "I don't have gloves." Right. I hadn't realized she hadn't grabbed a spare pair from the truck. Her hands were shoved into her jacket sleeves, red from the cold. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the keys, and tossed them to her. "They're in the back seat. Just grab them and hurry back, all right?" She gave a reluctant nod and turned, jogging back down the trail we'd carved through the snow. Within seconds, she disappeared over the crest of the hill, leaving me alone in the growing silence. I looked around. Just me, the freshly cut spruce, and the vast, quiet forest. Tristan was taking a while, and I didn't feel like standing there doing nothing, so I sat down on the trunk of the tree. The snow crunched softly beneath me as I rested my weight. The forest stretched out in all directions, endless rows of pine trees cloaked in white. It should have been peaceful, maybe even beautiful. But the sun was almost completely gone now. The sky above had darkened to a deep navy, and the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was thick, still, like the woods were holding their breath. I pulled out the flashlight I'd packed and clicked it on, casting a beam of cold white light through the trees, just in case Tristan had trouble finding her way back. But if I'm being honest, part of me was starting to feel like I wanted someone, anyone, to come back soon. Other than the wind whispering through the trees and the faint sound of tiny snowflakes landing on the branches and ground, the forest was silent. Too silent. Not peaceful, not serene, just unnervingly still. The kind of silence that wraps around you and makes you feel like you're being watched. Sitting there alone on the tree trunk, with the light from my flashlight casting a shaky circle on the snow, the whole thing started to feel off, creepy even. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard it. The sound of boots crunching through snow nearby. Relief washed over me. I stood up and yelled Tristan's name, raising the flashlight and pointing it toward the sound. But then, the footsteps stopped. Just like that. No response, no voice, no movement, just silence again. I squinted into the darkness, scanning the trees with the beam of light. I figured maybe Tristan was messing with me, trying to sneak up and scare me as payback for dragging her out here. So I decided to beat her at her own game. I set the flashlight down on the stump beside the fallen tree, aimed it out into the woods, and carefully crept into the shadows. I crouched low and tiptoed through the snow, doing my best to stay quiet as I moved behind one of the big pine trees nearby. My breath was tight in my chest, the air icy in my lungs as I crouched behind the thick trunk. I waited. Then, footsteps. They were coming closer, crunching through the snow, faster now. Then someone charged into the beam of the flashlight. Not walked, not jogged, charged. I froze. It wasn't Tristan. It was a man, some random guy, wearing a coat and a hood that shadowed most of his face. His movements were fast, too fast, almost aggressive. He barreled toward the light, his head low, arms stiff. He didn't hesitate. He ran straight to the flashlight, looked down at it for half a second, then grabbed it and turned it off. And just like that, the forest was black again. Pitch black. No light, no face. Just a dark shape standing in the place where the light had been. I couldn't see him clearly anymore, but from the way he had charged up like that, from the way he moved, I knew. Whoever he wasn't out here for a Christmas tree. He wasn't out here for anything good. I held my breath for a second, just one. Then I turned and ran. I didn't look back, I didn't want to, I didn't need to. My boots pounded through the snow, sending ice and slush flying as I sprinted downhill, branches whipping past me, lungs burning. I knew he'd heard me. I knew he was probably right behind me, but I couldn't stop. All I could do was run for the truck and hope Tristan was already there. I was about halfway down the hill when I heard it. "Tristan!" She was screaming my name. Her voice pierced through the quiet forest like a blade, sharp and frantic, laced with pure panic. I ran even faster, slipping once on a patch of packed snow, but catching myself just in time. Branches scraped against my arms, snow sprayed up with every step, but I didn't stop. Then I heard something else. The truck's horn. It was blaring over and over, urgent, desperate. I hit the bottom of the hill and sprinted through the trees toward the sound, heart slamming against my chest. My legs were burning, but adrenaline pushed me harder. The moment the truck came into view, I didn't slow down. I yanked the door open and jumped into the driver's seat. Tristan was already inside, curled up in the passenger seat, face pale and eyes wide. "Drive!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fear. She didn't have to tell me twice. I threw the truck into gear and slammed on the gas, tires skidding for a moment before catching the frozen ground beneath. We lurched forward, snow flying behind us as we barreled out of that little wooded clearing. And then, we both turned and looked back. Just for a second. And there he was, standing exactly where my truck had been parked only moments before. A man. The same hooded figure from the woods, just standing there, motionless, watching. The falling snow swirled around him, but he didn't move, didn't chase, just stared at us. Two sets of eyes locked in a moment that felt far too real, too close. Like we hadn't escaped. Not completely. The drive home was long, quiet. Neither of us spoke much. We kept looking at the rearview mirror even though we knew we wouldn't see him again. But the fear didn't leave. Not even when we reached the edges of our town. When we finally pulled off the road and into the parking lot of a Home Depot, we didn't even need to say a word. We both got out, went inside, and picked out a pre-cut Christmas tree under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by crowds and pavement and safety. It wasn't the perfect shape. It didn't come with a storybook memory, but it was good enough. We've never gone back into the woods again, and we never will. No more traditions, no more cutting down our own tree. Not after that night.